talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
Hi guys, I'm Sunny Chayes, and you're with us today on Singin' in the Rain with always a tagline, the power of one. And I'm feeling kind of serious these days. Sometimes I'm a little bouncy and sometimes I'm just feeling kind of urgent. And this is a time when I'm feeling urgent. I'm like getting choked up already. Oh my God. And I have a whole show to do. I have someone in the studio with us today. I'm really, really excited. I've wanted her to be here for a long time, and she's finally here. I'm really, really grateful. Her name is Lynne Lyman, and she's the California State Director of Drug Policy Alliance, which is a national organization that's been working diligently and extremely effectively of late on ending the war on drugs. And she is also one of the proponents of Yes on 64, and she has a very, very long bio, but as you guys know, I like to jump in and we edify as we go along. So she is very, very worth your time, and so stay with us and let us just bring her on, John, shall we? Here's Lynne Lyman. Woo!
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you here because I love to do the myth busting, and you're a great myth buster in a huge way that I feel is extremely important for what's going on in our time right now. So I'd just like you to kind of go in. I know you are a good talker.
All on Prop 64.
Well, whatever comes to your heart to say right away. We can start with Yes on Prop 64 and kind of why that's so important now. And one thing I would say, I can just say, even though I asked you to start talking, is that I feel like a lot of people, my viewers, listeners, and my clan are very scared, upset, frustrated, and just kind of in shock about the political system right now, or what's happening. And it's like, how do we get to this? And I just feel that's why I'm so on board with Yes on Prop 64, because I feel like it's a place where I can use my power of one and actually make a difference to my brothers and sisters down the street, down the hall, down the coast of California. So again, thank you so much for doing what you do, and thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, Sunny. It's great to be here with you again. I have been here in a different studio.
That's right.
But it's been several years, so it's great to be here and to have the opportunity to talk to you and your audience about Prop 64, which is the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. Let me give a little background, because I'm not sure how much your crowd and your followers and listeners are familiar with, but around the marijuana legalization effort. There were 17 initiatives filed to legalize marijuana in California this year. And this, it's been a multi-year struggle to get where we are today. And Prop 64 is the only marijuana legalization initiative that will be on the November 8th ballot. So the confusion of multiple initiatives didn't happen. That's the good news. And this is a comprehensive, complex consensus measure, and it does a lot. We get a lot of flack for it being 62 pages and why is it so long, but there's a lot in there, and this is about a lot more than just being able to, smoke our weed freely where we want to. So this is really a big civil rights and social justice initiative.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. And I think that is something that I've learned with having Colorado and Washington sort of going first, and perhaps learning from sort of that journey. And California being, I believe now, it's the 7th biggest economy in the world and basically like a small country in itself. To get it right here is a hugely important thing, I feel. And it seems like that's what's happened with this bill, that it's so encompassing a lot of different aspects of California and just humanity, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're really grateful that we didn't have to go first. We're grateful to Colorado and Washington for, taking that on in 2012. Being much smaller states, it was easier to do. But we also have really learned from those states, both from what we put in those initiatives, because our organization, Drug Policy Alliance, was part of both of those teams. And we learned, what kind of fix and cleanup bills needed to happen afterwards. And so with this one being that it's California, how large we are, the influence we have on the rest of the country, we decided really to make this the most progressive and far-reaching marijuana legalization initiative in history. And so if we win, it will be the most progressive law anywhere where marijuana legalization is on the books.
Whoa. So let's get down about what this really means. Let's myth bust a little bit. So I want to get down and educate the peeps fast. So first of all, we have let's talk about the kids. Let's talk about how this affects things like child protective services and deportation and like that. I mean, we're both moms, and this is hugely important. I think.
It is hugely important. It's also one of the biggest attacks we get from opponents of marijuana legalization is that it's irresponsible for children. It's going to increase, it's going to increase use and all kinds of sort of unsafe environments for children. And so, there's two things that I want to talk about. First, the kinds of protections we built into this initiative to reduce access to cannabis for children. I don't think there's anybody who thinks, that children should be using cannabis in a recreational way. Medicinally, for some children, if that's what their condition requires, is fine. But so we did several things like really strict packaging, testing and packaging controls, labeling. Edibles cannot look like children's candies or children's toys. All edibles have to be, individually wrapped, packages that are opaque, fully labeled, resealable. So a lot of things to make it harder for them just to kind of get at by mistake, because that is one of the concerns that came out of Colorado, were sort of accidental poisonings for children consuming edibles.
Just like we do with any of our drugs, meaning the things we get medicinally from doctors and like that.
Exactly. And in fact...
using that common sense, basically.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of noise around the poisonings because they went up so much in Colorado. But the truth is that nobody was calling for marijuana poisoning before marijuana was legal, because they would have had their children taken away. So that's one reason the numbers went up. And when you look at the numbers, compared to poisoning by a child accidentally swallowing a laundry soap pellet, it's nowhere near on the scale of that.
Ooh,
so we're still talking about just a few. But
may I also just interject really quickly? I don't want to derail you, but this bill is not specifically or at all condoning the use of marijuana. I think some people have that as a misunderstanding. So it's not about that.
Whether you love marijuana, hate marijuana, don't care about marijuana, it really doesn't matter. You should be supporting this bill because it's about civil rights. It fixes a broken system that we know doesn't work, and it also has reparative justice, so repairing some of the harms of the past. But before we get to that, though, I just want to say one more thing about children that's often left out of the mainstream debate around children, which is that while, yes, we want to protect children from access to cannabis products, we also, in this initiative, protect them from the criminal justice system, which has had a devastating impact on our children, as we know. And the, sort of school community to prison pipeline, marijuana offenses have been at the forefront of what's pumping children into the criminal justice system. Under Prop 64, a child will never go to jail again in California for a marijuana offense.
Amen.
Period. This is legalization for adults 21 and over. It doesn't legalize anything for children. But what it does say is that if a child, in California, a child is 17 and under, is engaging in any marijuana activity that's prohibited, the punishment can be no greater than an infraction with no financial fine attached. And that infraction would be served through a drug education class, an hour of community service, counseling if that's what's needed. And at age 18, their record will be sealed.
And the other piece about which I think is so important, because again, it just ruins their life and their family's lives, and it trickles out. The other thing is sort of the flip side, not the flip side, but the parents. In other words, Child Protective Services.
Yes, and thank you. You mentioned that. So we put in another layer of protection for medical marijuana patients who are parents. So it's not for all adults. To say that for someone who is a validated patient, meaning they have a recommendation from a doctor, a current recommendation from a doctor for the medicinal use of cannabis, that Child Protective Services cannot take their child, and that their marijuana use cannot be used as a criteria for removing the child or otherwise, limiting their contact with the child.
Oh my God. I mean, that's so important. And then we were also talking about deportation.
And deportation. Yeah, I'm telling you, this thing is packed. People wonder why it's so long. So So what a lot of people don't know is that even though in California, marijuana possession is currently an infraction of a $100 fine, that's possessing 1 ounce or less of marijuana is an infraction since 2011 in California. But the issue with that when it comes to immigrants, and I'm talking even, fully legal, documented, lived here their whole life immigrants, is that any drug offense is considered a deportable offense under federal law. Ooh. So what I might get a $100 ticket for, my friend Ayumi, who is, has lived here her whole life, our children go to school together, she has never changed her citizenship status. If she was caught possessing marijuana, then she could be deported for that. And there goes, another family who loses, a child who loses their parents. So this is going to take a big dent out of that, because once law enforcement are not prosecuting marijuana possession anymore at all, then they won't be putting those immigrants into that deportation pipeline. We don't have numbers specific to California on deportations, but we do have the national number. And in 2013, nearly 7,000 people were deported for marijuana possession only.
Oh my God. I mean, again, myth busting.
Myth busting.
Like when I tell people, for example, that last year, because again, another bit of myth busting is, well, what does it matter in California? There's all this gray area, and that's why we're here today, guys, to let you know exactly what's what. Because even though you may think, well, it's legal or it's easy to get a card or whatever, it's actually not true. And 15,000 people were put in jail in 2015, which means, 15,000 families and out it goes for marijuana use. Is that correct?
Not exactly, but very close. So we don't know exactly how many people were put in jail in 2015, but we do know how many people were arrested, which was approximately 15,000.
I see.
And I really want to speak to this issue of marijuana is practically legal anyways in California. Why does this matter? Because we get that all the time. Mm-hmm. And my answer to that is marijuana is only practically legal for white people. Mm-hmm. Because if you're brown or black, and especially if you're a young man, then the chances of you getting an arrest and whatever comes after that are so much higher. So, since 1996, we legalized medical marijuana. And in 2011, we reduced simple possession of marijuana to an infraction. Because of these two things, there's this feeling that marijuana is legal in certain communities. So despite that liberalization of our marijuana laws, we are still arresting, over the last 10 years, 500,000 people were arrested for a marijuana offense.
And to clarify, when I was saying, and thank you for that clarification, because I realized that not all arrests
end up in jail. Yeah.
However, there is a lot of complication that happens. I'm sure financial hardship and all of that. It's extremely disruptive, and it's just not fair.
No, and an arrest, is incredibly disruptive to your life, and most of the time results in some sort of case, even if it's not jail time. It does result in a record, and having a felony on your record limits the opportunities for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. You can never get a school loan from the federal government. Most business licenses will be unavailable to you. You can't get many types of public assistance. So all the sort of basic civil rights that we have, once you have a felony on your record, even if you've served your time and done your probation and it's all closed up, that stays on there forever. So that's another thing we're going to do with this initiative, is that everybody in California who has a marijuana offense on their record will be eligible to have that record reduced.
So this is retroactive,
It is
actually?
completely retroactive.
Ooh. Oh my God, John, do you love that? This is amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a miracle. Thank you so much, the whole team, for putting something. And I feel like sometimes timing is everything. I think a lot of timing is everything, because I mean, I'm so glad to know that this is retroactive, because I mean, for these people who've been in jail for no reason, in my humble opinion, that's criminal,
Yes.
honestly. And I just feel like, I mean, it just kind of shocks me that we are stigmatizing people for doing things that people have done for thousands of years, that are considered ritual, part of religion, part of as I say, ritual and rites of passage and this sort of thing. And I mean, I even think of coffee, like that alters. Well, it alters me, I'll tell you.
Caffeine is a psychoactive substance,
And that tends to be legal, at least last time I looked. And yet, another plant that one might believe God created for our earth to be growing out of, we've decided, I mean, and many of us know the war on drugs and the history, and we can break that down a little bit too.
Yeah, because
but
I would say most people don't know the history of the war on drugs. I
Okay, well, let's
rarely
go
run
in.
into somebody who does. And
let's bring it, Lynn.
It's long and complicated, but specifically looking at the origins of prohibition, marijuana prohibition, heroin and cocaine. They're each based in the intentional and institutional oppression of a particular minority at that time, particular immigrant minority often. So our first anti-drug laws were around heroin, around opium in San Francisco. This was directly about oppressing the Chinese immigrants who were there building the railroads. And, Americans had been using heroin. We used it regularly in the 1800s, and in the early part of the 1900s. It was a medicine you got from your doctor. Mainly white middle-class women used it. And but as you know, opium is a Chinese spiritual, cultural tradition, and they brought that with them to San Francisco. And so then, as a really easy way to criminalize the whole group, we made heroin and opium illegal in San Francisco. And marijuana has the same history, and it's about Mexicans and Mexican Americans and immigrants coming up from the South into the Southwest in the 1930s. They were migrant workers, and they used marijuana, medicinally and spiritually and culturally. It's part of, as you said, many different cultures. And so as a way to criminalize and oppress and control those Mexican migrants, in 1935 we passed the Marijuana Tax Act, which was the beginning of marijuana prohibition.
Goodness. And that's we're ending that stuff. It's like the time has come. The time has come. Let us end the madness, for God's sake.
There's a long way to go, and marijuana legalization is just the first step. It's not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of the battle. And I really want people to take that and feel that and let that sink in. There is so much work to do, and we had to be careful of marijuana exceptionalism. In other words, saying, well, let's make marijuana legal because that's a good drug and all other drugs are bad. It really doesn't matter. Whether drugs are good or bad is a decision a society makes. But how we treat the humans who use any of them should be equally compassionate and loving, and in a caring way instead of in a punishing way.
Well, and exactly, amen to that. And I just look at all the things that we consume as human beings on the planet Earth, and let's just talk about America. And we have many things that we're allowed to consume. For example, I mean, we can have wheat here. It's not illegal here, but our wheat happens to be banned, like in Russia and other countries, because they just consider it toxic, bad news. I mean, a lot of countries don't take our beef, whatever. So we take a lot of things in America that are super unhealthy for us. Of course, processed sugar and, McDonald's and whatever. And we don't really regulate that for our kids. But this situation is just completely gotten out of hand. And also, speaking of regulation, that's part of the kind of the beauty of this bill also, because there is regulation making the marijuana use actually safer.
Absolutely. So, in addition to the sentencing reform and the criminal justice penalty reductions, this initiative, Prop 64, creates a regulatory system for the commercial cultivation, manufacture, distribution, and sale of cannabis products. And in many
Fantastic.
ways, it just mirrors what Governor Jerry Brown and the legislature did last year for medical marijuana regulation, which hasn't taken effect yet. So some of your listeners may say, you know, there's a new dispensary that pops up every week and they're not good neighbors, etc. That is that problem is a lack of regulation.
I see.
Because after we legalized medical marijuana in 1996, our state elected officials refused to regulate it. They just didn't have the courage to pass something in Sacramento. And so we tried for 20 years to regulate medical marijuana. It never happened until last year.
Ooh.
And those new regulations are still being sort of put together. And so both medical and recreational regulations, the commercial side, will start in 2018. There'll be a year of rulemaking between now and then.
And then this will dovetail.
And it will dovetail. For the most part, it dovetails with what the governor did.
Well, but so again, I think that's so incredibly important. And one of the things that I've been feeling so much through the conversation of marijuana, and again, it's not my thing, but the stigmatization and like you were saying, of all drugs. I mean, there are people I know who use different drugs that have caused, problems in their life. And, and again, I don't think, I would say to their mom, you wouldn't want them in prison for that.
Right.
You would want them to be dealt with, like you were saying, caring, compassion, and to our brothers and sisters in ways that make sense and also work.
Yes.
Throwing somebody in jail for, doing heroin or whatever, it's just like, we wouldn't do that with our animals.
Well,
Why?
We know it doesn't work because we have the data, we have the numbers, and we have all of the stories and the lives destroyed. The United States has 25% of the world's prisoners. We're only 5% of the world's population. This has never happened in human history, that a society has incarcerated so many of its own people. It's a first in human history. And when you look at what drove us from being sort of a normal incarceral state to this outlier, it was our drug laws that really ramped up with starting with Nixon in 1971 and then ramping up through Reagan and Clinton and all the way up. We have so many drug laws on the books and recriminalize so many small behaviors that we have this just balloon in jails and prisons that you've seen, and no support for people when they get out, reentering society, all these barriers for them to work in society. And that brings me to one of the points I was really hoping to raise, which is how not only are we trying to change the future and what comes next with this initiative, but we also wanted to turn behind and said, how can we repair some of the harms of marijuana prohibition? And how can we use this legislation to also to do some reparative justice? So
some mea culpa-ness.
Some mea culpa-ness. So, it's not big, but we've done a handful of things that I think are all first ever. So the one about formerly incarcerated people is that we prohibit discrimination in licensing for people with prior drug convictions on their record. What that means is that the regulating agency cannot deny somebody a cannabis license because they have a marijuana felony or even a heroin felony on their record from the past. If they've served their time and they've served their probation and their case is fully closed and completed, that cannot be used to deny them a license. And this is it's never happened. Normally, most businesses proactively say nobody with a prior can get a license. And we're saying you can't use that to deny them. So that's one piece. Which, by the way, the cops are furious about and are attacking us about and are really... sort of their ugliness comes out around this issue. I think that many in law enforcement believe once you've violated the law that you need to be punished forever. And that's really what it means if you don't support people coming back into work in their community. The second thing we've done is like a reparations fund. So it's $50 million a year. into a community reinvestment fund that
beautiful.
it's specifically for communities that have been hit hardest by the war on drugs.
Wow, beautiful. And you were, I also know there's an environmental piece.
And that's,
which
in
is my
many
thing,
ways,
as you know.
that's also about reparative justice.
Absolutely.
But that's about reparative justice to the land. And,
Yes.
illegal marijuana grows have really devastated many parts of California and our natural habitat. Corrupted watersheds, diverted watersheds, a lot of land erosion, growing on, public parks and state and national parks. So a lot of sort of terrible environmental consequences have occurred over the last 20 years because we didn't have any regulation. Again, going back to why the state government never regulated. There are many great cannabis industry cultivators and other professionals who self-regulated. But then there's always bad actors, like there is any time.
Right.
And so you had these bad actors who did all this environmental damage. So this initiative puts in about $200 million a year
Whoa.
to do environmental restoration, remediation, and then just green space support once the remediation is all done.
Well, and what I love about that is I have no idea what numbers mean because it's not my thing, and it could be a drop in the bucket or it could be whatever. But I feel like it's just, it kind of breaks my heart open because it really does because, it's just part of this whole conversation. It's not just about stigmatizing people, separating people out, or demonizing people. And I mean, where in the world does that ever work? And, we've known for thousands and thousands of years that clans living together, working together, eating together, growing together, having babies and raising them together has always been the way it's about, what it's about, where it's at, as we used to say. And this whole feeling about this is to really look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
This is a holistic bill, as I would say. It's feeling through all of it. And it's also the feeling that we can just kind of calm down people, calm the nervous system down around this, the collective nervous system. We do have a lot of fear that's just sort of mucking about. And I feel like when this is passed, like you would say, I sort of feel like, guys, we have some days, we have a number of days, not weeks, years, and, like that, where sometimes I feel with the environment, it's just a never ending kind of thing. But this is something that we can actually act on in a short time. It's coming up. We can use our vote. We can use our voice. We can use our power of one and make a difference kind of like now. And that's a huge, huge gift to me, honestly. It just calms me down. And because we just need it. We just need it. It's just the time has come. And like Zach Leary was saying, our new buddy, Timothy's son, let's end the madness.
Yes.
And, also with jails, we now know in other countries. Oh, one thing I did also want to say, speaking of Zach, when he was talking with us earlier about the concept of the other myth bust, which is if it's legal, people, the proof is not that people will be using more marijuana in the streets and everyone's going to be, it's not like hookah or cigars on the streets. It's that's most probably not going to happen. If you've ever been to a concert in LA or anywhere, your smell, it's right. So the proof is there.
Smoking marijuana in public will remain illegal. So that isn't going to change. And so people have to essentially consume cannabis in their private spaces.
Right.
And there was something else you said a moment ago about, Zach, about stopping the madness.
Yes, and the punitive aspect and the really demonizing.
Yeah, and
the holistic aspect.
The idea that things are going to break loose and everyone's going to be, using
crazy,
marijuana. So what we've seen in the other states is that youth use does not go up. And either does use in our age bracket, which I won't even say what that is. But the only sort of population that we're seeing cannabis use increase for is senior citizens.
I love it.
I love
that
it too.
cracks me up.
And we've even seen, and then there was a study that came out a couple of months ago that looked at Medicare spending in states that had medical marijuana and saw a huge drop in Medicare prescription drug costs because people are using, senior citizens are beginning to substitute. So I think for the, folks who study societies and behaviors of people, it's really going to be interesting to see how this affects different kind of populations and different subgroups.
Well, yeah, and again, I think of prohibition, and that all of these things are a sociological experiment, and so then things get worked out, and I think that the fact that all of these drugs became illegal was also a sociological
That's right. It was
experiment, and we've
intentional.
seen that it's been, damaging beyond anyone's comprehension. And I feel like at this time, really gathering this all together and understanding, even as far as science goes, and we have strawberries on the planet that do really great things for us, and we don't really know everything that's in a strawberry. I don't know if we ever will. And with THC, or in the marijuana plant, I know there are many, many elements that are just being studied now in the last 20 years, and will be continued, that this will allow more easily to be able to be studied, and what amazing benefits may come.
Yeah, and so there has been, some great studies over the last 2 decades, but there has not been funding. And of course, you can't get federal funding if you're doing anything other than saying marijuana is harmful. So we actually take some of the revenue and put it into medical marijuana research.
Fantastic.
So there's a great institute down in San Diego that does medical cannabis research, and they will get $2 million a year to do that research. And then we also putting $10 million a year into the UC system to study legalization. All of its impacts, economic, health, social, all of these issues we've been talking about, because really up until now, we don't really have the information to make good decisions. We know for the most part that, cannabis is much less harmful than something like alcohol or tobacco. But that's a really broad statement, and we need a lot more information to understand, the impacts and what's the best way to regulate it in our society. The majority of the revenue, so we haven't talked about revenue, but this initiative, Prop 64, is expected to raise about $1 billion a year once we're fully implemented. So 2019 will be the first year we see the tax revenue, probably be 22 before we see the full, we're really in the fully implementation stage. The bulk of the revenue, I've talked about the Community Reinvestment Fund, some of these other pieces, the environmental piece, but the bulk, which is 60% of the funds, will go to drug treatment, drug education, prevention for young people. And that's really a broad category. So after school programs would count as drug prevention, because we actually know the best way to keep kids from experimenting and developing problematic illicit drug usage is to have them engaged in programs and activities. And so those are the kinds of things that will qualify as prevention. And there'll be funding for traditional kind of drug detox or rehab.
Reentry
services, legal services. Yeah, so really broad. Family reunification efforts, dropout prevention. All of those things will receive funding from this initiative.
God, amen. One thing that I was also thinking about was sort of taking the heat. I don't know that much about police, but what I do know is that they used to be called peace officers in my lifetime. And I also remember Andy Mayberry. And I also remember, just having them there, getting the cat out of the tree or whatever. That was also the firemen, but whatever. And now I'm scared of them. Even I am. And I cannot imagine what I would feel like if I was black. It's like I just know. I see them pulling people over constantly, like some mom who's late getting their kid to school. And I'm thinking, what the hell? Like, they're just trying. So I appreciate the opportunity to move this sort of out. So, I know you can talk far more about that than I can.
And what you're speaking to is really this approach of mass criminalization, where every little thing we do has become criminalized.
Like mass hysteria criminalization, I feel like.
But with real consequences.
Right,
And so there's so many areas where we need to reduce the criminalization of that activity. We can as a society say we want you to do this and we don't want you to do that without making everything criminal.
Right.
So what this does and is it takes away one of the primary tools that law enforcement uses to engage average citizen right now is marijuana. So this takes away that tool. So they're going to have to come up with something else. I'm sure they will. But it's not going to be, I smell marijuana, you look like you're using marijuana, none of those things, unless someone is consuming in public. That is still going to allow law enforcement to come and and ruin your day and possibly your life.
Right. And so with that, I mean, I feel like that, but that makes a huge difference.
It does.
And of course, obviously for people who are considering, the dollars and cents of California and the nation. I mean, again, most of us know that it costs more money to keep someone in jail in California than it does to put someone through Harvard.
Absolutely.
And when we think of that, and I don't even understand that because I've seen the jails, not personally, but in Germany, for example, and they're kind of lovely. Like they're, and it's about reparative and it's not about punitive, which we have here. It's sort of this idea that people, exactly, or, just sort of serving your time and having some consequence for some action, but it's not about ripping down the person's dignity and every element of their humanness. And they have locks and they have little bathrooms.
They're like little dorm rooms in Germany.
They kind of are. Yeah, a little kitchen they can cook, and there's a door that actually closes, and
colors on the walls,
and they actually have like yellow and all that. And then I'm thinking, well, then why is our prison $50 grand a year? Like, I mean, I know families that live on $50 grand a year.
It's much more than $50 grand a year. So an average stay in.
Are you throwing that picture up, John? Yeah, please do.
The average stay in LA County Jail is, or in the jail system, is about 40 to 50, but a day in the prison system is between 60 and 70,000 a year.
And we think of, what does anyone get for that? Anyone, like that's just completely
and I have
like anti-money.
And I've been inside the jails and the prisons here in California, and they're
you've
terrible
done
places.
yoga.
They're terrible places for anybody to have to be.
Even the people who work there. I mean,
even the people who
everybody.
work
I mean, the
there.
whole situation is not about humanity.
No, it's not. It's what our incarceration system really represents is a mass societal failure of all of our other social programs.
Mm-hmm.
Jails are our number one housing program in the United States.
Let's be real.
Let's
Just
be
tell
real.
it.
When we
just say
begin
it,
to
Lynn.
talk about de-incarceration and getting people out of jail, we need to be building housing, and that is part of why we're having the homelessness crisis we're having in California the last couple of years, because as we've begun to decarcerate, we haven't invested in housing and other services. All of our money is locked up in the criminal justice system, and we really need elected leaders who are going to have the courage to begin to take money away from corrections. Prop 47 is a great example of a failure of leadership by our governor. Prop 47 was passed in 2014, a great law that reduces many small felonies to misdemeanors. The outcome of that, including drug possession, by the way, the outcome of that was...
So those were nonviolent?
Yeah. Simple drug possession. The outcome is that tens of thousands of Californians were eligible to be released from prison and jail and to have their records reduced or expunged. But we didn't invest in the programs they would need to support them. Now, the initiative had identified that there would be savings from the prison for that, $100 million. And indeed, there was $100 million of savings in the first year. But the governor took the money and put it back into the criminal justice system.
Oh, my God.
He originally allowed $29 million to come into services. After a lot of us screamed and yelled quite a bit, he bumped that number up to $49 million, but he took half the money.
Good God.
And put it back into the prisons, even though the voters had, with a really big mandate, said we want that money to go to services for people returning home, our returning citizens. So this initiative and our $1 billion, it's not a given just because it's written in the law. We're going to need citizens to stand up, help watchdog that money, keep their eye on it, whether you're interested in the environmental money, the drug treatment money, the public health money, the community reinvestment money. We are going to need to watchdog and really fight who's ever going to be in office, over the next decade, to make sure that money comes back to the communities the way that the voters will hopefully approve it.
Whew. Well, and again, thank you for that. And and again, I'm thinking of Child Protective Services and families not being, it's sometimes hard enough to raise kids as it is to have all of these issues where, some at any moment these people turn into like the Gestapo when we live in. Excuse me, is this America? Like, what happened? Where are our civil rights for all people? John, do you have any questions, by the way?
No, I'm just listening.
Okay, I'm just curious because John is our engineer. You guys all know John, and I just thought he would jump in. But the other thing that I want to ask John actually is how much more time do we have? Because we're taking our whole 50 minutes.
Yeah.
And so
we'll go gone 38 minutes.
Oh, okay. So what we can do is, I know we're going to have another guest that's going to be, that we're going to put to this show. Lynn is the busiest person on earth right now. She's on like everywhere. And so I grabbed her to come in for a pre-record today, to be honest with you guys. So we're going to add one of Lynn's favorite peeps, TBA, in the next bit. And, so in 2 minutes, you're going to have a new person, but right now it's for us, it's 2 weeks. So I want to just, and again, it's TBA for us too. Yeah. But, again, I mean, I'm sitting here with this book, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. I just really,
that book changed my life.
As a white person, I mean, I can't help it. I say to other white people sometimes, I mean, I just have so much shame around this, and people are like, well, Sonny, you're not doing it personally, but it's like, but I benefit from it. I just do. I know I do.
Yes.
And it just breaks my heart open. I just, so.
Yeah, whether we want to or not, we all benefit from white skin privilege. That book especially was life-changing for me because I've been in the criminal justice reform movement most of my life. The drug policy reform movement is new to me, and it was that book that brought me there. In 2011, when that book came out, and I read it and for the first time understood how our drug laws and the drug war were really the feeder for mass incarceration. It almost didn't make sense to work on ending mass incarceration if you weren't going to go, where the most people were being funneled in.
Basically,
and
yeah.
so that book brought me to Drug Policy Alliance and the work I've done there for the last 5 years. So such an important book for me and many what I'll call more traditional criminal justice reformers. Organizations like Drug Policy Alliance and ACLU and others were really on the forefront of this work and have been doing this work for 20 years when it wasn't popular. Even 5 years ago, most people didn't know what criminal justice reform meant,
right,
or what mass incarceration was. So we've come a long way, and I think we've especially come a long way in terms of our consciousness and our learning as a public. What hasn't happened is a real change in our laws because we do not have leaders that have the courage to truly change this system. You can't just hold a training and hope that cops stop killing black people. That's not how this works. We need whole-scale transformational change from the bottom to the top of the criminal justice system.
Yes, amen. And I feel like you're saying there's a listening. I mean, both you and I are friends with Marianne Williamson, and she talks about this a lot. And she has one of my favorite books, Healing the Soul of America, and talking about all of these things in a really real way. And I feel like that's what's sort of happening too, is that the faith leaders, the spiritual people, if we call them that, the sacred leaders, the, just moms, and so many people are coming together. And so that's why I hope that everyone listening will, especially you guys in California and any of you who know people in California, ask them to listen to this show, watch this show. And of course, last week we had Patrice Colliers and Drew Dellinger. Patrice, is a co-founder of Black Lives Matter. It was a really powerful kind of history, sort of creating the bowl that we're now in, and just getting kind of real about what we really can do, and not stigmatizing our brothers and sisters when we don't really know what their story is. And I think John is telling me we have to wrap it up. So I want to thank you, Lynne Lyman, for everything you do and everything you are, and working so hard on this, because I know you work so hard, and Drug Policy Alliance and all of the other proponents that have brought this to us as an opportunity for us to use our power of one. So I have to go. Bye. Oh, my God.